Good morning, Stephanie Hayes. How are you on this fine Thursday morning? I'm assuming it's about 3 a.m. where you are.
2. Yeah, it's sunny today. That's a new thing. We usually have January, so I'm excited that it's like feels like summer.
What is the average? So first of all, tell all the millions of listeners out there, where do you live and
I
what
am
sort of
between
weather are you
Vancouver and
accustomed
Whis
to?
I'm between Vancouver and Whistler in, British Columbia, but, like, we have pretty nice weather in the summer, and it gets super hot, and it's lovely, but most of the year, we're rainy and dark and cloudy.
And also why you and I are almost the same age, but you look 20 years younger and I look 20 years older is because I live in sunny climates and yeah, you just look great.
Well, let's
Well,
face it, it's all the time you spent on the tanning beds too.
oh God, that is so terrifying. Me being on a tanning bed, I would look like some sort of um, I don't know, maybe some sort. I'm not sure. Well, so
Like a glove?
Stephanie, we are just talking backstage. We were gonna have a guest this morning. Unfortunately, we had a snafu. These things happen. We couldn't connect with our guest this morning, and we were pondering what should we do on this Thursday morning when we still have one more day without Anthony Franco. And I said, let's just do it. Let's just go through. We'll talk about the subject and just do it, you and I. And really, frankly, you and I are so smart. We don't need guests and humble too. We're
Speak for
incredibly humble.
yourself. I'm just like I'm rented for hire. I don't You got me off the street.
Well, I'll tell you that I'm here in Southwest Colorado, my parents' house. They celebrating my mom's 80th birthday, which is good, but I had to run to the paint store late last night to get thinner, and it didn't work.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was saving that especially for you, Stephanie. I just thought that was too good to even just tell you in pre-show because I went to get dinner and it didn't work. I love the fact you just are silent on that just terrible dad joke.
I just
Uh
you know
the no, go
Speaking of
ahead. I was
age.
gonna go into it. Yeah.
Yeah, but speaking of age, it was pretty funny. I was at the liquor store the other day, and, the cashier asked me for my ID, and as I was going through my wallet, my Blockbuster card fell out, and she went, "Oh, never mind."
Oh, only a small percentage of the population is even gonna get that joke. Anybody that's kind of when did Blockbuster actually I think that there's a couple more Blockbusters that still exist, but when do you think they closed? Like
Like,
2000 maybe?
I don't even think it was
To
that
the
far along.
yeah.
Um,
Well, so today we're going to stick with our original topic, but we're going to throw a little bit of a curveball. So I'm going to start by talking about why do 90% of startups fail while others seem to navigate every challenge with supernatural clarity. Only 23% of executives report high confidence in their strategic decision making, according to McKinsey research. Meanwhile, Charlie Munger once said about building mental models, I never allow myself to have any opinion on anything that I don't know the other side of the argument better than they do. When asked how he made such consistently brilliant investment decisions, Munger's response was typically blunt. It's not that we're so smart. It's that we've learned to think less stupidly, which is, I mean, something I strive to do almost every day. So
I'm still
today,
learning.
Stephanie, yeah, we're still working on it. Today on Out of Founder, we're going to be talking about building mental models. I am Chris Frank, Stephanie Hayes in for the
What was
curmudgeony
his name
Anthony
again?
Franco. I don't even know. I
We forgot.
believe he's fired at this point. Yeah.
That's right.
Although I think he's the only one that actually does show notes. So one of us are going to have to figure that out at some point a little bit. So I want to talk about mental models. And so you've earlier in the show was like, I don't know anything about mental models. And I've famously said, I think you know a lot about mental models. It's just something that we don't call that often. So I'm going to start by just asking you a question. How do you define a mental model? What is it?
To me, it's a framework, right? Like to me, it's we want to get a little existential on it on us ourselves. To me, it's a framework with which you approach everything that you decide or that you do or inside your business. And like it's like a frame of reference. I don't know. I was kind of toying with that myself. Like, how do I define mental models? And I know they exist, and I speak a lot about different mental models, but defining them. I mean, what? How do you define them?
I think it's the exact same way. It's a series of steps or boundaries of which you try to
Mm,
define and answer and solve problems. So one of the problems, and you and I are both ADHD, and so one of the things that happens with ADHD is that we start to bring in very disparate connections. Like, oh, I'm trying to solve a problem with technology, and I'm suddenly starting to think about Renaissance art, which is for us. However, mental models help us limit and stay focused on what are the ways to actually solve a problem versus going off into left field, et cetera. And so, with that definition, first of all, does that definition fit at least now for as we start kind of
yeah.
the conversation?
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
that's how I think about them too, and I also think that, like, it doesn't necessarily. I think we have our own personal mental models, and they're a conglomerate of all the things that sort of frameworks we've tried and learned about, and then things that we've experienced, and they sort of evolve, and I think they become very personal. I don't know what you think
I
about that,
I
but
100% agree, and I think that's where I want to get to is to start to say. So if we start with this idea that everybody has mental models, and some of those mental models are good, and some of them are not good, they do not serve us, right? So starting with this idea that okay, mental models are the process that we go through and we think about, and you just hit, I think, one of the major points, which is middle models were built by this conglomerate of our experiences and our knowledge and all the books we've read and all the weird podcasts that we've listened to or done, and those all come together to help us think through a problem. The question for you is, give me an example of how you use a mental model in your life. Like what is one thing that you use on a fairly regular basis on using a mental model? And we talked about time management when we were backstage. Like, is that
mm.
one of the things
Yeah,
you
you know what? That's actually a that's a really good example because long before I was diagnosed with ADHD and properly medicated, which let me advise you to do that.
Here,
Um,
here.
it was really really tough. Like I got to the point where I literally had like maybe 3 hours a day that I could possibly even get anything done because what was happening is that my brain was constantly negotiating with itself because I had no model with which to prioritize, make decisions, or um, you know, find any sort of guardrails. And like what we were talking about earlier is I sort of established this way of working that allowed me to constantly be checking all of my decisions against the things that I, wanted or knew to be true, right? And then it allowed me to kind of get to a place where, I had a process, and if I could fit all of my decision making into that process, has allowed me to almost put it in a container. And then I would run all of these decisions against what I knew had to be true. And that what I knew had to be true, this is the daisy chain, right? What I knew had to be true was a culmination of all of the things that I had learned in the past that served me well. So if I knew myself as a business owner and I knew that this had to be true and this had to be true, this had to be true in order for me to be successful and enjoy what I was doing, then those became sort of my mental model, if that makes sense, right? So like I've got rules that sit on top of process, that sit on top of guidelines I've learned, I guess. Like I'm also probably incorporating like best of breed, thinking that all come together to govern how I work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It strikes me as like you run through filters. And so you kind of think through stuff by running through filters of previous experience, knowledge, expertise, et cetera, till you get to what you know is true, and then you're able to prioritize based on that. Is
Yeah,
that a fair summation?
and I would throw the question back to you, like, here's one thing that I've learned about business owners is, and in some ways it kind of drives me crazy, but I everybody wants to be able to just follow some steps and then they'll be successful. And, I would say not everyone does earlier on, and because it's very, very confronting to have the responsibility of the success of your business, especially if you're not a business person or you don't have the experience. And so there's this tendency to want this comes up for me around things like EOS as well, right? Not that I have any problem with EOS, but when we try to stuff everything into someone else's model, I think that's when we get out of alignment. So my question back to you is, there are models and there are, mental models that we can adopt, borrow from, use. How effective are they if they're not ours?
Wow, what a big question. I think I think that there's, and this is going to get a little bit more complicated, but I think there's small mental models and large ones. And so what you're talking about is a company operating model. And it's like, how do I make decisions for my company, and how do I gauge the opportunities, and how do I decide which opportunity to take, whether I should pivot, whether I should stay the course. And I think that those, to a large degree, so to answer your question directly, they have to be yours. I've been in EOS and I've been out of EOS. I've done lots of those models, but they don't work unless you own them. And so, and even the EOS implementers will tell you, you have to make it your own for it to work for you and your company.
Yeah.
But the smaller things, I think, are the ones that make up the larger mental models. And I'll give you an example because we talked about Charlie Munger. And Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett are classically talking about two ideas that are so simple but super powerful. And the first one is opportunity cost. And opportunity
Mm.
cost is something that we as founders are terrible at. We don't think about, so opportunity cost is weighing the things that you're not going to be able to do with the decision you're making. And so you're looking at the consequences of your decision and saying, if I make this decision, what does this mean? What am I giving up to make this decision? It's an economic principle, but it's one that founders rarely go to say, let's look at what we're giving up, right? And that's
I
like
think
really
I think
small
that
one.
I think that we do use them, except we lie to ourselves.
Right, explain.
Right? Like, we get so enamored with an I this is the whole kill your darlings thing, right? We get so
Yeah.
enamored and so confident with a direction that even if we're using a mental model like that, a little one, and even if we have evidence that maybe maybe this isn't the best option, we still find ways to maybe use other mental models to prove that maybe it is. We're
This is,
so
and I think
driven
what
by innovation.
if you're getting to is, I think, really the heart of this conversation. And I want to get bigger again and talk about how, what sort of pressure we have on our mental model. We as founders, we're constantly between these two opposing forces. And the first one is, people like you and I constantly say to founders, go out and seek data, go out and try to get people and look very analytically. You're probably going to be wrong. You just don't know where you're going to be wrong. And then secondarily, we look at founders and say, you got this. Like, just, you know the answer. You just have to get out of your own way and come up with that answer. And those two things really, I think, is probably the central conflict for a lot of founders in thinking through some of these problems. Agree or disagree?
I agree, and there's like a little piece missing. There's a nuance missing for me, which is there's like big M mental models, big MM mental models, And then there's sort of intrinsic mental models, right? So when we talk about mental models, I think we think very much about like, oh, what can I learn that I can adopt, that I can put into my business? And then there's the mental models that develop based on our experiences and based on everything we learn. And those are the intrinsic sort of intuitive ones. And so I think this is what I see happen a lot is that business owners don't trust themselves enough, right? So once you get more experienced and once you get further along, I do think strategic decision making is far more effective when it really is driven by intuition, provided that you have done your time learning and getting experience and driving. We met with John on Monday, and I think he's a great example of somebody who's developed his own mental models and now uses those and trusts them. But when business owners give away their power and rely and try to rely simply on an external model of whatever, whether it's strategy, whether it's decision making, whether it's something else, they lose all the power inside their business and they lose their connection to what they're actually doing. So there's this evolution for me. Like, this is why I get so stuck on it, is because I feel like we our job is to go and collect a lot of information and collect and be observant and open ourselves to all sorts of things that we learn. But our job is also to give a lot of credit and respect to what we're developing in our own brains and our own experience and in our heart. And when I start working with business owners who have gotten to this place of what I call burnout, really what they are is misaligned, because they've tried to take everyone else's models and execute on those, where once they step into what they intuitively know and believe, then we have the answer to it's usually where their business needs to go. So this sort of like push and pull and friction between structured models and what we develop on our own is sort of what I keep spinning around on, right?
Well, so let me ask you the question then. If, and I think you're right, as we kind of think more deeply into the topic, the thing I see most about founders is they get frozen. And
Mm.
freezing, fight, flight, freeze, freezing is devastating for an early stage company. Like, you just have to make a decision. Even if the decision is not right, you can always backpedal and find another, alternate, pivot, whatever. However, freezing in a moment where you're like, should I go this way? Should I go that way? Can be really, really difficult. And it's because they feel pulled in these different directions. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I really, really resonates with me, is that there's going to be this world of conventional wisdom out there. And there's people and there's gurus, and I fucking hate them, Stephanie. People that charge founders to tell them what to do. Like, I really like people that ask critical questions to founders, them come to their own answers. But this idea that somebody's going to know your business better than you as a founder is just utter bullshit. And so it's this conventional wisdom. It's what you read and all these things, and then what you feel, and what you feel is right. And you just don't want to be wrong because you have so much of your heart and your ego tied up in this decision. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, like my job is to be able to read other people's mental models. Like, now that you're saying it, this is kind of what I because
That's what I said.
founders
This is
who are
what you do. This is
yeah,
your job.
founders who are in that freeze mode or the flight mode, because I'm an exit strategist and people come to me saying I want to sell my business because I'm just so frustrated. I don't know what to do. And they want someone to tell them what to do. They do, because they don't have it in themselves or they can't process it. And so that's when they go and they pay for these $30,000 masterminds and go and just go implement the thing that worked for me. And then they end up even more stuck.
Yeah.
So I will tell you what to do, but what I'm going to tell you to do is what I've discovered about you. Right. And learning about you and understanding you as a business owner and being able to pull your mental models out. All I'm doing is I'm synthesizing what I've learned you want. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to put that into, a form in which you can execute on that. But I'm going to reflect back to you what is in your heart. And now all of a sudden you have a business you love. Right. So that is, I
That's
think,
such a
the
critical
trip.
piece, right? And
Yeah.
so what you and I both know is that getting what you want out of your business isn't that hard. I know it's almost heretical. Figuring out what you want is really, really, really hard. And so
Yes.
I've got a process that I walk people through, and that I've walked through a ton, and it's probably the most important middle model in my life. And it's the value setting. It's your core values. And core values are a really difficult thing to do. They can be painful. Can make you revisit trauma. It can make you look at really difficult parts of your life. But to me, the number one mental model that served me best in my life is looking at my core values and trying to weigh decisions off of that. How about you? Is that the same way? Do you have
Yeah,
any
that's
other
so
something
funny.
similar?
I have a whole framework I've built for working with these business owners, and it's basically like I call it design and align, right? So again, I have always talked about people end up with what I call a Franken business, right? Where they've learned, an arm from someone and a leg from someone else and the brain from someone else. And then they have this business that's like parts of everyone else, but it's not them. And so the very first, it's like a 6-step process, or it's a 6 session process. And the very first thing is we come back to who you are, and what is your business passion. And it's going to be one of 4 things. It's either the customer that you work with, it's the offer you've created, it's your one of your core skills, or it's the way that you want to work. Now, traditional business education will always tell you start with the customer and work out from there. But if I did that, I'd build a business that I didn't really like. And it all started to
100%
come
true.
to me when I was working with people. And, I was working with a client who was like trying to figure out what her business was. But what I know, after she was just like apathetic about pretty much everything. And then she started talking about a particular customer that she worked with, and she just lit up. And I'm like, there's your energy and there's your passion. So for you, it is that particular customer, and everything else needs to be built around that. But for me, I would sit down and like get coached, and they'd be, okay, well, here's your ideal customer. I'm like, well, I know that, but it's not like, I don't care. Like, it's not, that's not the thing that drives me. What drives me is the way that I want to work. And I'm like, oh, so for business owners, it's one of these 4 things. Everybody wants to put money into marketing, right? Oh, my business isn't working. I just want to go buy some other marketing tactic or marketing technique. And now you're just putting good money after bad. But when you come back to who you are as a business owner, all of a sudden you realize how you've built a business that's totally in friction with who you are. So that first exercise, we do that. We do, what does your business need to do for you? What needs to be true in your business? Values. And what are the things that have prevented you from getting there, so that we can make sure those things don't happen again. Now we've got the core for alignment, and that's the whole mental model there. Then we start building on that. Now we talk about who you're serving, and we talk about your offers. Like, it all stacks. If I know who I'm serving, or if I know who I am as a business owner, then I can be clear about who I'm serving. Then if I know who I'm serving, then I can build my offers to align with both those things. And then I can build my financial plan to align with my offers. And then I can build my marketing to align with what I'm trying to, like, if I have a plan to make $1 million selling $41 products, that's a real different marketing strategy than if I have a plan to make $1 million selling, $200,000 contracts, right? And then we talk about your systems and your operations and what's going to have to be in place to support that. And then we finally talk about how you're going to work to be able to, execute on all these things. So that's this whole mental model, is like, you got to get back to understanding yourself as a business. And so every decision that you make going forward has to be aligned and support those things. Otherwise, you've got a business you hate, right?
It's so poignant. It's such a critical piece of what you're saying, which is if you build your business really based on what you care about. And if you, I've got 100 examples, and I know you do too, of people that started businesses because it was a really unique market opportunity and then burned out because they weren't really interested in solving the problem. They didn't
Yeah.
wake up in the morning thinking about, hey, I want to solve this problem. And you
Yeah.
can, I think, and sometimes find proxies. You want to build just the best team, or you love technology that that can help that. Like, I don't think Zuckerberg really cared as much about social networking. He loved solving problems with technology, though. So that kind of
Yes.
became his passion. So I want to, if we define these mental frameworks and we define this thought process, and I think you clearly align like what is a very good series of steps that we can walk through to help us as business owners stay aligned, et cetera. the problem is that there's other things that come into play. And I want to talk about, even though this is not something that's normally discussed when we talk about mental models, I want to talk about the bad mental models. And it's when stress happens or when failure happens or when something, you're going to get knocked down if you want to do this job, and you will fail if you want to do this job. The next mental model that typically comes up isn't a particularly positive one. And it's, oh, I'm an idiot. I've got imposter syndrome. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm freaking
Yeah.
lost. I'm buried here. What am I doing? I should just quit and go get a job. That's another mental model that's playing out. Even though we don't really call it that mostly, we call it doubt or whatever. I think it would be interesting for you to, if you believe that to be true, let's just use it as a hypothesis for a second. Are those moments, is that another mental model? And if you're playing them, and if so, how does that affect a smaller model trying to play into your big stay aligned in your business model?
Yeah, so much, and, like, I'm gonna go a little, like, feminist here for a second because I see this play out so drastically more with that was great English, but with, women business owners, because think about the narrative that especially our generation has had for, our entire lives. All these things work against us, right? And so women who are in business have to fight so hard, not, and I'm not talking like, oh, gender discrimination or anything like that. I mean to fight their negative mental models because
Their own
they
mental
like,
models, right?
yeah, let's talk about we were talking about this before we started, but as women we are valued. Think about what you say, people say about a woman when she passes away, right? Oh, she was so nice. We're valued for being nice and nurturing, but you can't be too nice, otherwise you get trampled all over in business. You're valued for being helpful and not taking advantage. Well, what happens when you start to ask, like, women have a hard time selling because to them, like, that's not nice to ask someone for their money. And they go in either one extreme. They go like fawning, or they end up very aggressive in sales. And so, like, there's this constant dialogue, and you're not good enough, right? Or you don't have the experience, or you don't have, what it takes. And I remember, like, a client just said to me yesterday, I just feel like I'm constantly getting laid off, right? And so this resilience and this the social and cultural dialogue that women are facing all the time, um, is like so hard for them to overcome. And I will say, like, most of these women are constantly fighting. Who am I to do this? Uh, I don't want to be aggressive. I don't want to be sleazy. I don't want to, like, selling for them is very hard. And so when they finally get that actually selling is about relationships, and relationships are things that women do really, really well, when they realize there's a different way of doing it, then we overcome this. But it is most of the work I do with my very early stage folks is combating those negative mental models constantly. And those will sadly prevent most of these, like, I've given them the tactics and the strategies and the thinking and the mindset and the way to do, but they just won't do it because it's so confronting. And those negative mental models are so much more powerful than their ability to be like, I'm gonna surpass this because what I want, and again, we're not supposed to want things, right? What I want is so much more powerful. I'm gonna be able to hammer through those really negative emotions. So I would say that's the number one thing that makes these businesses fail is the power of those negative models. And they don't even have to be that dramatic. They can also be like, the thing I do well is technical work. So I'm just going to keep doing technical work because now I feel valuable, and I can't get myself past that to become a leader.
And I feel like you just said so much. It's probably, sounds like you need to write a book. It's like, it feels to me, speaking specifically of women, about this constant pull, this constant pressure about that society and the stories about what being a woman and a businesswoman in our society, what that means is that you be nice but not too nice, be powerful but not too powerful, be attractive but not too attractive. All this just pressure that you're constantly trying to battle. But there's one additional one that I want to hit on, which is, if it's really hard sometimes for founders, but particularly female founders, to admit that they're good at something. There's this sense of
Right.
like, oh, you're actually really good at sales. Oh no, I'm not. No. Right. And
Right.
I see it show up a lot. Is that just another one of those negative mental models, Stephanie?
Totally. 100,000%. Now, I am actually quite unique in my peer group of women because I, for some reason, don't have the gene that makes me care what other people think. Like, I care about the people who are close to me and that sort of thing, but I could not care less if I screw up. I don't like, to me that's just new good information, but I would say there is so much pressure for us to be if we do something, we better do it perfectly. And also never talk about how good, like, okay, we want to go into like trauma therapy. My number one memory, most painful memory from being a child is doing cartwheels at a children's festival and my mom saying to me, stop being a show off. Oh my God. Like, you couldn't have said something to me that made me feel worse, right?
Right.
And women are constantly self-deprecating. They're constantly, and we have to be taught how to embrace and identify what we are good at and what we care about. And so I had to unlearn that my parents' conditioning, where you never ask for help, you never talk about yourself, you never say you're good at something. And I remember I just said it to them the other day. I was like, I'm really good at whatever. And they're like, oh, Stephanie, oh, well, aren't you egotistical? Like, that was that
Yeah.
generation that
Right.
raised us to be like, be sweet, be quiet. My parents always encouraged me to get an education, but then when I wanted to work and my husband stayed home with the kids, they were like, what are you talking about? Right. So, like, we're really in this weird transition phase right now of trying. I see my kids' generation, like my daughter, she's a teenager, she has her things, but she's also like, no, I know I'm pretty. I know I'm pretty. I know I'm awesome. Like, but she's not
Yeah.
egotistical about it. She's just like, yeah, it's a fact, right?
Actually,
But
yeah.
there's
Right.
so much more self-esteem in that generation and that group. And so I'm hopeful that these guys grow up thinking they're just as, like, if we all had the confidence of a middle-aged white man, like, we would be doing really powerful things. But you can see in the disparity in, like, women founders get, I think, 1% of VC funding, and yet they're the ones who always make better profit, who,
Yeah. They
on the,
have
like,
better
on the whole,
outcomes, right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, better outcomes. So, I don't want to turn this conversation into, like, women versus men, but it's a place where you can see it, what we're talking about, you know much more acutely, I guess.
All right. So if we're starting to kind of figure out how to put a point on this conversation, which is, I'm just going to recap and then maybe sort of direct it towards some sort of learning points, which is, mental models are very real. I would say, we didn't say this explicitly, but either you write your mental model or the mental model is going to be written for you because it's there already, right? And you are already using mental models to make decisions. The only question is whether or not they're positive ones or negative ones. They're ones that you have created for yourself or that have been given to you by family or by society or whatever else. Secondarily, there's individual tools within mental models, like the small, in our definition, the small m mental models of using inversion or using opportunity cost or things like that to help us along the way. But the reality is the larger mental models are designed to help us authentically make decisions and wade through the mountains of bullshit that exist out there for advice and conventional wisdom, et cetera. And I think that what you said eloquently is that every person, even if you try to put some other framework on top of it, we used EOS as an example. It's still, you have to own that. It has to be your mental model as a founder. You cannot delegate it. It cannot be anybody else's. You really need to have your own systematic thinking on that. And then the last part of the conversation is recognizing, even with the work to create your own models, other models will start to play on top of it. Gender norms, societal norms, all the bullshit that we've gone through, all the failures, et cetera, will start to create these loops. Is that a pretty good summation of where we are right now?
Yeah, and as you're saying this, you're kind of making me start to think like, how can we create an exercise for founders? Like, because I think anybody listening to this might be like, okay, I get it, but now I want to know what my mental, like, how do I discover my own mental models? Because I think when you can almost codify it, and put it on display and say here are the things, here are my guardrails, right, that mine, like, how can I extract those, how can a founder extract those and understand themselves and their own mental models and start adopting and making them consistent in their, in their day to day.
Yeah, I think, and I think probably both you and I have opinions on that, but I think that our approaches would be very, very similar in the sense of the hard work, the really hard work is to ask yourself what matters most to you in life and in business, then figure out how to build on top of those a story that you can tell yourself. And to me, a mental model is just a story. It's a story you can tell yourself that makes this thing make sense. And so I use a derivation of Dr. Brene Brown's core value workshop. You can find it on her website. She's remarkable.
Yeah.
That's a really good place to start. And then from there, I use what's called a why statement, which is just a summation of why you think that you've been gifted these unique abilities and talents and how you're going to apply them to make the world a better place. And then, how do you continue to, how will that show up in your decision making in business is the more tactical part of that. I, I want to go one more place before we go, but is there anything else to kind of add as we've started to narrow the conversation a little bit?
Yeah, and one of the striking things that one of my mentors sort of presented to me last year, which really made me think, is like there's a sort of like this triangular um, model of success, and part of it is, what do I have, what do I believe, and what do I do? And we all get stuck in this, what do I do? But what's actually more important is, what do I believe? And what do I have? What do I want to have, and what do I want to believe? And then we can figure out, what do I do? And so I thought that was a really helpful model, and that goes back to understanding, the core values and the core beliefs, and those being the drivers of all the decisions that you make.
So, the last point I want to get to before we sort of put a topper on this conversation is the problem with this work is that it's really easy to do in isolation. And we touched on how things start, then these other stories start to play out and failure, et cetera. But even earlier on, before we came on, we were talking about time management and how both you and I kind of try different time management systems, and we'll come back to one and we'll do that. And it's just part of being curious and trying different systems and learning. But sometimes it just gets stressful or noisy or difficult or frenetic, and it's really difficult to stay consistent, and you start to get feeling a little bit misaligned with your mental model. How do you get back there? Because you just did it, right? Like, you just stopped. You're like, whoop, time out. I need to get back to my, best time management system that I know. So even in that moment, what was that decision like? And how do we recognize that we're getting too broad and too, that can stay really focused on what our mental models are?
It's that codification of what we believe and what we need and what we value, right? Like, that's why I do that work at the very start of all of my engagements with my clients, is coming back to, you know, what are you like, what is your core business passion? Is it one of those four things? And what are the things that need to be true all the time? Even if you write them down, I knew I needed to change because I felt some, I'm so somatic, right? Like I felt this anxiety. I felt, and I've just learned over time that when I feel that, that's an indication something needs to change. So I think that's the evolution of a mental model, is like when we go from thinking, and that starts to manifest itself in, and we can trust what we're feeling. I remember my therapist said to me once, she's like, "You're so limbic, and this is not a problem you're going to think your way out of. You have to learn how to feel." And I was like, "Ugh," right?
No, I don't want to be
So
doing that. Yeah, exactly.
that sounds terrible, right?
We're
So,
business
but
people.
that
We're
is,
founders. It's about data.
yeah, but that is like over and over again, we've had these conversations with the people we're interviewing, is how much business is evolving into, being something more than a set of rules. It's a set of, like, we can train ourselves to be able to feel what we need to do next, right? And that's that higher evolution of knowing. It's that codification of all of our beliefs and our values and our understandings, and you can almost put them into, the more that you reiterate them to yourself, the more you understand that that matters. There's another one, right? I might understand it, but I might not believe it matters. It does, right? So getting to that place where you believe it matters, now you've almost got this little alarm system in your body that says something's not right here because I can feel it.
I'll go
Is
just
that, is
one
that
step
too woo?
further. Yeah. Well, so no, I think I'll go one step. I was about to take it like super hard sciences. In neuroscience, they've proven the fact that first you have to write something down. And it's actually better if you handwrite it. And my handwriting's terrible, but it doesn't matter. If you just
You're a boy.
handwrite something down, you can absolutely start to codify it. It's about getting feelings onto paper. And so, really probably my unsolicited advice here for people is to just start to write down their mental models and start to say, what currently exists? How do I currently make decisions? Write it down, do circles and arrows, and then say, what do I want this thing to be? And draw it or write it or use words. And then you said it before, Stephanie, you just had to recopy all of your tasks, all your backlog tasks from your old system to the new system. And right as you said, it was like, yeah, but it was pretty good because I got to do it again, write it down again and again and again. And I know it's a pain in the ass, but if you continue to do that repetition, saying, these are the things I care about, this is the framework that I use to make decisions, it becomes a neural pathway, but it becomes a very authentic one to what you care about. And it feels so much better than all those other stories and other mental models that people are trying to impose on you.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So,
that trust, believing that what you know and believe can be valuable, like, that's such a gap. That's such a leap for people, and then when they do make that leap, they're on fire, right? Like, they are so
right.
powerful.
It's so fun to see too. And it's so fun to see founders that have passion and they're just the smartest, most awesome people in the world. And I think, I've said it before in the show, but not for a while, which is founders are the most important people in our society. And it's hyperbolic, but it's true.
I
Founders
agree.
create value. They're people
I agree.
that actually create value from their minds and their energy and their passions. And we desperately need more founders, and we desperately need more founders to be awesome and go out and do that. And it's like these small tweaks that you love doing, Stephanie, and I enjoy doing it as well, is just trying to make sure people get aligned because the value that they create for our society, our world, humanity is so much greater when they can stay true to what it is that
Yeah.
they care about the most.
I have the belief that entrepreneurship will fix us in a lot of different ways, and I don't know if you read Freakonomics, but, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and talk about something that probably, a lot of people don't wanna talk about, but when you, um one of I don't know if you read Freakonomics, but it would, to me, I loved it.
I loved it. I thought it was great. It was just a
Yeah.
terrific book.
So he derives patterns social and sociocultural anthropological patterns based on data. And he will examine data of like the most bizarre things to find these correlations. And one of the correlations he made was that the legalization of abortion had positively impacted crime numbers down the road. And part of this was that there, like, because of all the economic factors about the development of our society, moms had to work now, and they weren't spending enough time with their kids, and they weren't able to, you know, there was this correlation, another data correlation of, kids who grew up with more time with their families and, were less likely to get into, crime and blah, blah, blah. Right. So when I think about entrepreneurship, I think about the fact that it allows us to have the freedom of our time and the ability to do the things that are really important to us. Like, I started running my own business because I hated that I would leave at 6 a.m. and come home at 6 p.m. I have no idea who my kids' teachers were or the people they would talk about. I felt completely removed from my family. And, this gives me I work really hard, probably more than I would have worked in a job, but I also get to drive my kids to their activities, or I get to see them and spend time with them. And they have way more presence in their life of their parents than I did growing up. And I just think, like, there's so many ways having meaning and ownership over your work means that we develop things that are so much more aligned with what our customers need. And, like, there's just so much to it that I really like. There's a much bigger mission around entrepreneurship for me than just, I think founders are so important.
Agreed. All right. So almost impossible because we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of very interesting ground, I think. I think that our conversation is awesome. I think that this, and I think we're awesome, Stephanie.
We did okay.
Um,
We did okay.
yeah. So if possible, let's say, what did you take away from this episode? What are you going to learn? And what are the real sort of key learning points for you?
So just what we've sort of been talking about just now is the codification of mental models. Like, to me, that's going and, thinking like a founder, to me, that's going, what can I build that is going to help people do that? Because I know I do it in my work with them, but how can I empower these founders to codify their mental models? And you can do it yourself through some of the steps that we've talked about now, but it's about becoming really, clear about what you believe and what you want to have, and then figuring out what you're going to do to support that. And I think one of the other things that you said that, really struck me as, important is the concept that we have so much truth inside of us, and that our mental models are made up of so many different things. And so how can we surround ourselves with more of those things that contribute? And also, how can we expose ourselves to the things that are the shadow side of our mental models to better understand and better learn them so that they can contribute to us knowing what we do and we don't want, right?
That's right. Unbelievably good conversation. Stephanie, you're the best. And I've just so enjoyed our week talking together and doing this. But I'm going to go deep dive. Here are a few recommendations. We talked about Dr. Brene Brown's work on core values, just basically anything on Dr. Brene Brown's website. She gives it all away for free. She is a remarkable research-based scientist who has come with some very clear and awesome insights that I don't think she gets credit enough for her academic foundations, which I think is very strong. Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman. It's still the most important business book ever written. Just starting to understand the key points of that book will help you so much in understanding what mental models are and how we're not always in control. These are just things that happen to us based on how our brains work. Mental Models for Better Decision Making, The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish, and The Case Against Facts by Harvard Business Review by Michael Schrage. Any other suggestions for us, Stephanie?
No, but I think the last thing I wanted to say is, what did the 0 say to the 8?
I don't know. What did the 0 say to the 8, Stephanie?
Nice belt.
Oh God. You know the reason why we can't broadcast in Hawaii
God. No,
is
why?
we're pretty funny and people like to laugh at us, and it's a low ha state. Stephanie, one more time, just for all of our billion, I want to say billions of listeners at this point, where can we find out more information about you? Where can we connect? If I wanted to get your awesome services, where can I find it?
Well, I would block you, but if somebody else did, I'm at stephaniehayes.biz.
StephanieHayes.biz. That's amazing. It has been a joy and a pleasure. We're not saying bye for now because now you're roped into this. And clearly, either Anthony and I are going to get fired. So I mean, we look forward to seeing who's your next co host, Stephanie. I think it's your show
Is
now.
this The
So
Apprentice now?
yeah, we'll let you decide who you want to work with. Thanks for everybody listening. You can find out more about us on howtofounder.com. Go rank us. You know, don't go back and listen to any other episodes with Anthony. Just please, and then you'll see that they're awesome. And then give us some stars. Give us some love out there. We'd appreciate it. Other than that, we will see you next week, where we're going to be talking about something that I can't remember what we're going to be talking about next week, but we're going to be
Stuff and
back
things.
next week. Yeah, something amazing. Stephanie, thanks again. We will see you guys next time on How to Founder as I stall to find the end stream button. See you soon.